In a year where reaching unwanted milestones, I guess is one way to say it, has become a ridiculously common thing, this week we crossed another disturbing line in American politics. The President of the United States threatened to strip an American citizen of his citizenship and cut off federal funding to our largest city because he didn't like who the voters chose in an election. It sounds like something out of a second-rate dictatorship where, the kind where elections exist mostly for decoration, but this is happening here now under our government. So in this episode, I want to talk about what this moment really means, what powers a president does and does not have, and what it says when the leader of the free world treats certain Americans, particularly brown, Muslim, urban, and progressive Americans, as if they're the enemy. Hello, everyone. You're listening to Your Neighbor on the Left, the podcast where we talk about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, and I am your host. Our main story for this episode has to do with the unreasonable and, let's face it, overtly racist and anti-Muslim reaction of the president and MAGA in general to the election of Zohran Mamdani, who was elected mayor of New York City in this past election. Trump has made threats, as is his usual tactic, some of which are nonsensical and others that are just horrific. We're going to get to all of that shortly, but before we do, let's take a look at some hot topics. Let's start off with what's going on with Donald Trump's latest round of pardons. There's been a flood of headlines, some confusion, and a whole lot of political noise. What I'd like to do is cut through that and explain in plain English what matters. Here's the core issue. Trump issued sweeping pardons for people connected to efforts to overthrow the 2020 election. Big names: Giuliani, Meadows, Eastman, Clark, Sidney Powell. The whole legal Avengers squad, except instead of saving the world, they tried to sue it into believing an election was stolen. There's one key problem with these pardons. The president can only pardon federal crimes, and most of these folks have not been charged federally for the specific conduct tied to the 2020 election plot. So in practice, these pardons do almost nothing legally. They don't touch state criminal cases in Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, or anywhere else. What they do accomplish is political symbolism, and we'll get to that. But let's break down the mechanics. Presidential pardon is powerful, but it has limits. Limit number 1 is it only applies to federal offenses. Limit number 2, it cannot stop state charges. So when Trump pardons Rudy Giuliani for offenses related to the 2020 election, the reality is this: Giuliani hasn't been federally charged for those actions. None of the big names in the so-called fake electors or stop the steal legal scheme have been charged federally for those specific acts. This means the pardon is like handing someone an umbrella indoors. It's a nice gesture, but they weren't getting wet in the first place. Meanwhile, the serious legal jeopardy these same individuals face is all at the state level. And the state level prosecutors have already said they're not dropping anything because the federal pardon has nothing to do with them. This is why legal analysts are calling these pardons symbolic or preemptive, and in some cases, a loyalty signal dressed up as clemency. Now, you probably ask, If the pardons don't actually stop the prosecutions, why talk about them? Because presidential pardons carry weight even when they don't do actually any legal work. Symbolic pardons are political messages. They say, you're on my team, I'll protect you. You challenged the election for me, I've got your back. You stayed loyal, and I'm rewarding that. It's the political equivalent of giving a gold medal to the kid who came in last, as long as the kid is wearing your campaign shirt. This reinforces a pattern, of course. Trump often uses the pardon power not as a tool of mercy, but as a tool of loyalty. Presidents historically have tried to avoid that dynamic. Trump leans into it. This is the environment where norms erode. The rules haven't changed on paper, but the behavior changes. The expectations change. The public's trust in justice gets dinged every time a pardon looks less like a correction of injustice and more like a thank you card. Now, let's move on to the second big piece. The January 6th pardons. One recent story stands out. A Utah man, previously pardoned by Trump for his doings on January 6th, was just arrested again, this time on new assault charges. And this is not a one-off. He joins a growing list of people who were pardoned for January 6th, not because what they did wasn't illegal or because they really didn't do it, but again, because of loyalty. And then this group went on to be arrested again for new crimes. Here's some examples. A Florida man pardoned for January 6th was arrested the next day, literally the next day, on federal firearms charges. Another man pardoned under Trump's huge January 6th clemency sweep was later arrested in Illinois for aggravated kidnapping and sexual assault tied to an out-of-state warrant. And there are more cases that follow the same pattern. Pardoned for January 6th and then back in custody for new crimes, sometimes violent ones. This raises an uncomfortable question. Does the pardon give some offenders the sense that they are untouchable? Well, I mean, it doesn't legally, but psychologically, for some of these folks, perhaps. It sends the message, you fought for me once and I made the consequences disappear. For people with shaky judgment to begin with, that's not great. This is where things come together. Presidents are supposed to use the pardon power to fix injustices, to correct excessive sentences, to show mercy, to balance the system. What we're seeing instead is a president using pardons as a political tool and not much more, a reward system. And when a leader uses the pardon power to signal, if you support me, I'll protect you, that's not mercy, that's patronage. It chips away at the idea that justice is neutral. It suggests two sets of rules, one for insiders and one for everyone else. Now combine that with the pardon individuals reoffending, the public sees these stories and understandably asks, why were they pardoned in the first place? Was any vetting done at all on these individuals? Did anyone think through the consequences? And too often, the answer to all of those looks like no. The priority wasn't responsible clemency. The priority was rewarding loyalty. Now, for the average person listening, here's why this should matter. You live under a two-layered legal system, federal and state. Pardons only apply to one layer. Pardons don't declare innocence. They erase federal criminal liability, but they do not erase the underlying conduct. Symbolic pardons can still cause real-world consequences. They undermine trust in institutions. And if the message becomes political allies get protection, public trust suffers. When pardoned individuals go on to commit new crimes, the system looks even more politicized and, well, dysfunctional. Every one of these episodes from the current administration creates a little more cynicism, a little more division, a little more belief that justice is more about who you know than what you did. And that's dangerous. Democracies don't crumble in grand moments. They erode through habits and norms wearing down over time. And this is one of those norms. So here's the final point I want you to sit with. Pardons are supposed to be a tool of justice, not a tool of political reward. Trump's latest pardons, especially for people who haven't even been charged federally, show his willingness to bend that tool into whatever shape suits him at the moment. And the follow-up arrests of multiple pardoned January 6th offenders tell a story of poor judgment, poor vetting, and poor impulse control on the part of the recipients. If your first move after a presidential pardon is to commit a new felony, maybe you were not the ideal candidate for clemency. This is the pattern. Loyalty over law, perception over propriety, and pardons that function more like political shields than justice decisions. So the question going forward is whether we normalize that or push back against it, because the pardon power is only as healthy as the hands that wield it. And as long as we're on the subject of things that the president is giving away, let's talk about his latest promise. The idea he floated on Truth Social about giving $2,000 directly to every American citizen. On its face, I guess it sounds great. Free money, quick relief, a big, bold government check with your name on it. But like most political promises that fit neatly into a single social media post, this one falls apart the second you ask a basic question. How exactly is this going to be paid for? Trump's claim is that tariffs, specifically his massive new tariffs on foreign goods, will generate enough money to fund these $2,000 payments. The idea is simple. America charges other countries big tariffs, takes the money, and hands it back to the people. It sounds patriotic, like Robin Hood, except it doesn't work that way at all. Tariffs do not work like a cover charge for foreign countries that they pay to enter our market. They are taxes on imports. And the people who are paying them are American consumers and American businesses. Now, let's break this down in a relatable way. If Trump slaps a 20% tariff on imported televisions, Walmart doesn't pay the tariff. The manufacturer doesn't pay it. That cost gets passed right down the line to the consumer. You pay it when you buy the TV. Trump is basically saying, I'll charge you more for everything you buy, then give you some of that money back and act like I did you a favor. If your boss cut your paycheck by $100 and then handed you a $50 bill to show how generous he is, you'd know exactly what was happening. That's the tariff to check pipeline in a nutshell. You pay more up front, then you get a small slice of your own money back with the politician's name stamped on the envelope. So let's actually look at the numbers. The U.S. population sits at roughly 335 million people. If every citizen got a $2,000 check, you're talking about $670 billion in spending. Now, how much tariff revenue does the U.S. actually generate? In a typical year, tariff revenue is around $70 billion. Under Trump's first-term tariffs, it peaked at $85 billion. And that's only about 1/8 of what you'd need to push. And Trump's new tariffs ideas, 10% universal tariff and the fluctuating ones on China and other countries are going to raise more, but nowhere near enough. The largest estimates I've seen suggest maybe $200 billion if things go perfect. But even that assumes consumers keep buying expensive imports at the same rate they were buying them before. Trading partners don't retaliate. The global economy stays basically the same. And markets magically behave better than they ever have. Even with optimistic assumptions, you're still hundreds of billions of dollars short. That's a fiscal canyon, not a gap. So unless Trump is planning to borrow the remaining, $400 to $500 billion, or secretly raise taxes somehow, or cut huge domestic programs, the numbers simply don't land. It's like promising to build a skyscraper using pocket change and good vibes. Now let's pretend, just for the sake of argument, that Trump somehow does find $670 billion lying around under a White House couch cushion. Maybe JD found it. Would sending everyone $2,000 be harmless? No. In fact, it would most likely be inflationary. A massive, sudden cash injection into the economy could stimulate short-term demand without increasing the supply of goods and services. More people with more money chasing the same amount of stuff leads to, yes, you guessed it, higher prices. This is not hypothetical. We lived through a version of this in 2020 and 2021. Stimulus checks helped people stay afloat, but they also played a role in inflation because supply chains were strained. Now, imagine doing that on purpose when the economy isn't collapsing and supply chains aren't disrupted. You would be adding demand without any real justification. This means the same $2,000 that arrives in your account might fade quickly as prices climb. If your rent goes up $100, if your groceries go up $40 a week, and your utility bills jump 10%, that free money isn't really free anymore. It's another circular economy trick. Give people cash, then watch companies raise prices, then tell people they need more cash. We've already seen this movie, and the ending wasn't great. And as far as this promise goes, it can't help but make you think of the Doge checks, these checks that were floated as possible rewards to the American people based on all the billions or trillions of dollars of fraud, waste, and abuse that the Department of Governmental Efficiency under Elon Musk was going to find. It was all the talk on social media and news in the early months of Trump's second term, but I didn't get one. And I'm pretty sure you didn't get one either. So this new $2,000 proposal could be just another version of that, another gimmick designed to sound bold without being grounded in political reality. It's probably the case. Trump has a pattern. Promise something huge, blame others when it doesn't happen, claim he was sabotaged, insist it would have been great if he had gotten his way. Some examples. Mexico will pay for the wall. A big, beautiful healthcare plan. Infrastructure week. Remember the promise that tariffs would force China to pay billions to Americans, even though everyone who had a clue about how economics and tariffs work knew that U.S. consumers were actually paying the cost. This $2,000 proposal fits in that same mold. Big promise, tiny math, huge political payoff, very little chance of implementation. It's political theater dressed up as economic generosity. This kind of proposal works because it's simple, it sounds generous, it requires zero explanation to go viral, as we've seen in the past few days, and it appeals to financial frustration. People are hurting. Groceries are expensive. Rent is brutal. Healthcare is a hot mess. A $2,000 check sounds like help, real help. But that's exactly why promises like this are attractive. It's the political version of a miracle weight loss pill or a get rich quick from your living room scheme. It offers relief without explaining the actual costs. And it shifts blame. If Trump doesn't get it to happen, he'll say Congress blocked him. If it happens, then he gets to take the credit for doing it, and he'll blame the repercussions afterward on something else entirely. So let's end this segment with a reality check. The idea of giving every American $2,000 really sounds good. Everyone likes money. Everyone could use relief. But the way Trump claims he'll pay for it is deeply misleading. Tariffs are taxes on Americans. Tariff revenue is nowhere near close enough. $670 billion in direct checks would almost certainly cause inflation. And we've heard wild financial promises before, from Doge checks to Mexico paying for the wall, and they never, ever materialize. This proposal is less economic policy than it is political bait. It promises prosperity without explaining the cost. And whenever a politician says free money, don't worry about how it works, you should definitely be suspicious. There's always a catch. There's always some fine print. And in this case, the fine print says you're paying for it twice. Now, a supporter of the president would probably tell you that this $2,000 check plan is all based on the fact that the president feels for us as Americans and wants to help us. But that would require something called empathy. Now, we all know what the right thinks about empathy in general. And if you're paying any attention, you know that it's not the president's strong suit. As indicated in a recent incident that somehow manages to be both absurd and unsettling, which is, basically the national mood at this point, I guess. During a White House press conference about lowering the cost of obesity drugs, a man collapsed, literally dropped to the floor in the Oval Office. And while White House staff and medical personnel rushed in, President Trump stood there like a bored substitute teacher waiting for the fire drill to end. This wasn't a quick fainting spell in a crowded room. This was the Oval Office, cameras rolling. And the president, standing only a few feet away, looked almost irritated that the spotlight had temporarily shifted from him to a human in medical crisis. Now, we'll get to that in a moment, but first I want to talk about something equally bizarre said during the same event, just before we get into the meat and potatoes of the other thing, because it sets the tone for how unserious the whole production was from the get-go. Dr. Oz, America's favorite TV doctor and now cabinet member, made the now infamous claim that Americans would lose 135 billion pounds by the midterm elections if Trump gets this new obesity drug plan off the ground. Now, let's absorb that for a moment. 135 billion pounds. That's not a statistic. That's what you get when you grab a giant number generator and spin it like a game show wheel. To put it in perspective, humanity collectively does not weigh 135 billion pounds. The entire U.S. population together weighs maybe a tenth of that much. If Americans lost 135 billion pounds, the country would look like the ending of Avengers Infinity War, except everyone evaporated from the waist down. It's an impossible number, and the fact that Dr. Oz said it with a straight face tells you everything about the level of expertise being channeled into this press conference. It would have been funny in isolation, but then the real moment happened. A man near the podium suddenly lost consciousness and collapsed hard. People immediately reacted. Staff rushed forward. Someone called for a doctor. There was a scramble to help the man onto his side, check his breathing, get medical attention. This is basic human instinct. Someone falls, you reach out. Someone suffers, you move. Someone appears in trouble, you react. It's automatic. It's empathy plus adrenaline. Except for one person in the room. While everyone else responded in some natural human way, Trump stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, eyes staring off as if he just remembered an overdue tea time. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this one was worth at least that many. This wasn't shock. It wasn't confusion. It was boredom. An inconvenience, a moment where the spotlight had shifted away from him, and all he could do was stare out into the middle distance like a man stuck in a DMV line. Cameras captured at every angle. Trump unmoving, staring, practically annoyed. People who don't like Trump often interpret everything he does through the lens of malice. People who like him interpret everything he does as genius. But sometimes a moment is so clear, so unambiguous, that you don't need to be on either side. You just need to be human. A normal person reacts visibly when someone collapses in front of them. A flinch, a step forward, even a startled expression. Trump gave nothing. It was like he was watching someone drop a pencil. Theories, were bandied around, especially on social media. He froze. He was tired. He just didn't know what to do. He thought someone else should handle it. I mean, I guess they're all plausible if this were a one-off, but this is a pattern. Trump consistently shows zero instinctive empathy. Not low empathy, zero. And while it feels dramatic to say that about a president, it's actually a well-documented trait among psychologists who studied malignant narcissism. Which brings us to the uncomfortable part. Malignant narcissist is not just an insult. It's a term psychologists use for a personality profile that includes 4 traits. And as I list these for you, see if any of them remind you of someone. Number 1, narcissism. The belief that one's needs, feelings, and image matter more than anyone else's. Number 2, antisocial behavior. Disregard for rules or norms. Number 3, paranoia. Assuming others are out to harm or undermine them. And 4, sadism. Taking pleasure in dominance or the suffering of others. Experts have pointed out for years that Trump fits this profile disturbingly well. They caution that such individuals often lack genuine empathy. Not just low empathy, like the boss who forgets your birthday, but a complete inability to emotionally register someone else's pain unless it directly affects them. So while a normal person sees a man collapse and feels fear, concern, urgency, Trump sees a moment that isn't about him. And if it's not about him, it might as well just be background noise. That's what makes his reaction so eerie. It wasn't new behavior. It was a loud visual confirmation of something professionals have been warning about for quite some time. A president doesn't need to be a hug machine. They don't have to cry on camera or cradle wounded animals. But they do need basic empathy, because empathy affects decision-making in ways we often take for granted. If a president feels nothing when others suffer, they may ignore crises longer, respond slower, prioritize optics over safety, value praise over policy, blame victims, treat emergencies as interruptions. We've seen this in Trump's responses to hurricanes, mass shootings, COVID briefings, and now a man collapsing 3 feet away from him. It's not that he doesn't care enough. It's that he doesn't care at all. And that can be dangerous, because empathy is not just a personal trait. It's a leadership skill. Without it, governance becomes a performance rather than a responsibility. Now, I know a lot of you, as you listen to this, you're going to be reminded of so many other things that have happened under the leadership of Donald Trump. This Oval Office moment will get memed for a few days. Dr. Oz's math has been and will continue to be mocked. Trump's 1,000-yard stare will make the rounds, but beneath that humor sits a serious truth. The president's emotional reflexes matter. They reveal how he sees the world, how he values people, how he weighs human suffering against political opportunity. Trump's reaction wasn't human. It wasn't normal. It wasn't even neutral. It was absence, an emotional void standing in the most powerful office on earth. And when someone with no capacity for empathy holds that office, moments like this aren't just embarrassing. They're warnings. Warnings about the kind of leadership we have and the kind of leadership we need. And that brings us to our main story for this episode. One that was reported in USA Today, among other places, and one that should make everyone who's American, whether you're left, right, or, politically allergic, at least take pause and pay attention. President Trump publicly threatened to cut federal funding to New York City because the voters elected Zohran Mamdani as mayor. He also floated the idea of stripping Mamdani of his U.S. citizenship. That's not normal political rhetoric. That is authoritarian trial balloon territory. Mamdani is an American citizen and the son of Ugandan refugees of Indian descent. He represents a demographic that Trump has long used as a political punching bag. If you're brown, Muslim, an immigrant, or, some combination of those, you're treated as a prop in his speeches. So his attack on Mamdani fits squarely into a long, long pattern. But this moment is bigger than a cheap shot at one mayor. It's about presidential power, racism, vindictiveness, and the fantasy that the federal government can be weaponized against communities that way. Communities that vote the wrong way. And it's about how fragile our democratic norms become when a president decides that political opponents aren't just wrong, they're illegitimate. Let's start with the obvious. This was racist. There's no political wiggle room here. Trump didn't threaten to revoke the citizenship of a white Republican mayor from Wyoming. He didn't threaten to defund Oklahoma City because he dislikes a policy. The target was brown, Muslim, a New Yorker with a name that triggers the otherness alarm among his base. Trump's whole political brand leans heavily on deciding who counts as a real American. Spoiler, it's usually someone who looks like they stepped out of a 1950s toothpaste commercial. Mamdani doesn't fit that mold, so in Trump's worldview, he's fair game. And here's where the snark slips in, because this needs saying. If Trump wants to go on about who deserves to be here, someone should remind him that Mamdani hasn't been indicted on 91 criminal charges. So if we're ranking who's a threat to the public, maybe a guy trying to improve public transit in Queens shouldn't be at the top of the list. This incident is part of a larger pattern. Trump treats blue states and blue cities like rebellious colonies, places full of people who didn't vote for him becoming punching bags, budget targets, or props in campaign speeches. We've seen it before. Threatening to withhold disaster aid from California because he thought they should rake the forests. Attacking Chicago for crime while doing nothing to help. Treating New York, Seattle, and Portland as if they're foreign enemies rather than American cities. And calling Democrat-run cities hellholes while his own business sought every tax break they could squeeze out of them. Trump's political worldview is simple. If you're loyal, you get rewarded. If you're disloyal, meaning you voted for someone else, then you deserve punishment. That's not federalism. That's an abusive relationship. So, a little civics lesson that apparently President Trump skipped. A president cannot cut off federal funds to a city or state because he doesn't like the mayor or governor. The federal government is not his personal wallet. It doesn't work like, oh, you criticize me, no more FEMA money for you. Federal funds are allocated through congressional appropriations, formulas written into law, discretionary programs with guidelines and legal standards, court-supervised consent decrees, and sometimes matching requirements also codified in law. None of these say the president can do whatever he wants if he's mad at someone who won an election. Trump got smacked down hard for this in his first term, when he tried to punish sanctuary cities by pulling their federal funding. Multiple federal courts, conservative and liberal justices, said the same thing. No, you cannot do that. Congress holds the purse. Even the conservative-leaning Supreme Court would likely reject an attempt to financially punish a jurisdiction solely for political reasons, because that would undermine federalism, separation of powers, and any, coherent idea of constitutional government. So when Trump says he'll cut funds to New York because Mamdani won, he's bluffing. It's rhetorical fireworks meant to rile the base. And that's the dangerous part. Not that he can do it, but that enough people believe he can. Now, the most shocking part of all of this is perhaps Trump suggesting he could revoke Mamdani's citizenship. And this is where alarm bells should turn into sirens. In the United States, citizenship cannot be revoked just because the president feels like it. Not for political reasons, not for religious reasons, not for criticizing the president, and certainly not for winning an election. The Supreme Court has ruled multiple times that citizenship is a fundamental right that cannot be stripped arbitrarily. The only exceptions involve extremely narrow circumstances: fraud during the naturalization process, or aligning with foreign enemies in a legally defined way. None of that applies here. Despite all the rhetoric that you heard from MAGA and the president and other Republicans during the campaign, Mamdani was not born in the United States, but he is a U.S. citizen. He did not commit fraud in that process. He didn't join ISIS. He didn't wage war against the United States. He ran for mayor, and his political views differ greatly from the Republican Party. That's the whole crime here. When a president threatens to revoke someone's citizenship with no clear legal cause, he's not just being petty. He's signaling a worldview where citizenship becomes conditional, where some Americans are always at risk of being declared foreigners if they disagree with those in power. That's authoritarian instinct on full display. Now, let's zoom out from the legal mechanics and talk about the meaning of this moment. A president threatening to strip citizenship from critics is the kind of thing we condemn when it happens in other countries. It's what strong men do. And I'm saying that as one word, not strong men. Strong men. It's what collapsing democracies do. It's what leaders do when they blur the line between state and self. It also exposes deep insecurity. Leaders who truly believe they have the support of the people don't need to threaten their opponents. They simply beat them, fair and square, in elections. Trump's worldview is built on some certain core assumptions. Power is personal. Loyalty is rewarded and disloyalty is punished. Certain groups of Americans are more real than others. Legal norms are optional. And using government resources to settle personal scores is absolutely acceptable. This isn't new. He telegraphs this constantly. The only surprising part is how many people shrug and say, well, that's just how he talks. We cannot normalize threats to citizenship. We cannot normalize political retaliation against cities. This country is too diverse, racially, politically, economically, for any president to govern through revenge. Not to mention the fact that retaliating against a city with progressive or Democrat leaders is taking franchise away from the voters who put them in office in the first place. Now, before we wrap this up, I want to talk about one more angle here, and that's the Qatar angle, because it's important and it's also deeply ironic. MAGA's reaction to Mamdani has been filled with anti-Muslim fear-mongering, claims that a Muslim mayor is a threat to Western values and that he wants to institute Sharia law, and so on and so on and so on. They paint Muslim candidates as infiltrators and radicals. Meanwhile, Trump has spent the last 10 months cozying up to Qatar. Public praise, strategy meetings, business flirtations, the gift of the plane, giving them space to put an air base within the United States. All of these gestures that MAGA media and social media have defended. Qatar is a conservative Muslim monarchy that Trump happily courts. But an American Muslim mayor in New York, suddenly that's unacceptable. So apparently the MAGA rule is Islam is dangerous unless there's money involved. Mamdani isn't a foreign prince. He's an American citizen who was elected by other American citizens. Yet, Trump treats Qatar's leadership with more respect than an American Muslim mayor. That says everything you need to know about how transactional his worldview is. This moment is part of a broader shift in Trump's approach during his second term, governing as retribution. Every political opponent becomes an enemy. Every blue city is a threat. Every critic becomes suspicious. Every Muslim becomes a target unless they control a sovereign wealth fund. And citizenship becomes something you might lose if you fall out of favor. This approach destroys the civic glue that holds a diverse country together. America works only because we accept that people who disagree are still Americans. It's the principle behind all of it, particularly free speech, but all of the American idea. You cannot run a country of 330 million people on the idea that only your supporters are real citizens. The real danger here is psychological and cultural. Once people believe a president has the right to punish cities or strip citizenship, they start expecting it, and that's how norms start to collapse. So here's where we land. Trump's comments about Mamdani were racist, legally baseless, and deeply dangerous. He cannot revoke citizenship without cause. He cannot cut off federal funds just because he's mad. And the fact that he wants to do these things tells us everything about his view of government. This is a president who sees the country in two categories: people who serve him and people who do not. And if you're Muslim, brown, progressive, or a big city voter, you're on the wrong side of that line. The bigger question is not, does he have the power? The bigger question is, why does he think he should? Because that answer tells you what kind of country he wants. And it forces us to ask what kind of country we're willing to accept. If we allow citizenship, rights, and federal support to become conditional on loyalty to a president, we've already lost the core promise of America. The good news is that legally the Constitution still holds for now. Courts still hold for now. Congress still holds authority over funding. All they have to do is decide to utilize it. A president's threats are not the same as actual power. The bad news is that the line between empty threat and dangerous precedent gets thinner every time we let it slide. That's why episodes like this matter. Not because Trump said something outrageous. That's a daily occurrence. They matter because of what these comments reveal about the direction he wants to pull the country. Whether we let him is still up to us. And now, this episode's high note. I want to end on a story, a genuinely good story. Not good in the policy win sense or in the political victory lap sense. I mean good in the way that reminds you that people are still capable of doing simple, remarkable things for each other without being asked, bribed, threatened, or dragged into a cable news chyron. This story comes from Oregon, and it centers on a dad named Mason Smith. Now, Mason isn't a billionaire. He's not a philanthropist. He's not an elected official. He's not a celebrity doing a sponsored act of kindness video. He's just a dad who walked into his daughter's school one day, looked around at the cracked blacktop, the broken benches, the fading playground lines, and peeling paint, and thought, well, I can fix that. And then he did. Not thought about doing it, not talked about doing it, not suggested it be done. He actually picked up his tools and started working. It began with small fixes, repainting lines on the basketball court so kids could actually see where the three-point line was. He patched up benches, then he restriped the running track, then he moved on to the cafeteria. Then he built things the school didn't even know it needed until they suddenly appeared. Every project he took on made the school a little bit brighter, a little safer, and a little more welcoming. And as pictures of his work hit social media, the community took notice. People started showing up, donations came in, kids began cheering when they saw him arrive, the way kids cheer when the ice cream truck turns the corner. Except instead of popsicles, this guy was bringing confidence, dignity, and pride back into a space they spend most of their days in. And this didn't turn into some ego trip. He didn't slap his name on the court or carve his initials into the new bench. He didn't angle for a school board seat or try to launch a dad influencer persona. He just kept showing up because the school needed help and he had the ability, which is all a community ever really needs. Ability mixed with willingness. Now here's the part that gets me. At one point, Mason was asked why he was doing all of this, why he was spending his evenings and weekends fixing things that technically weren't his responsibility. And he said something simple, something that hits harder than any policy speech you're going to hear on TV. He said, I want my daughter to see that if you want the world to be better, you start where you are. That line should be printed on a billboard or a bumper sticker or tattooed in the inside of all of our eyelids, because that is the entire secret to community. Not waiting for someone else, not waiting for Washington, not waiting for permission, just starting where you are. Think about how powerful that mindset is. A lot of parents want their kids to thrive. They want them to feel confident and valued. But Mason didn't just say it, he modeled it. His daughter sees him building something. She sees people thanking him. She sees her school changing. She sees the impact one person can make. That's better than any lecture, That's better than any inspirational poster in a guidance counselor's office. And because he acted, others acted. One person's energy became a community's momentum. That's how real change happens. Not from the top down, but from the sidewalk up. There's something profoundly hopeful about that. Because right now, so much of the national conversation is about what we can't do, what's broken, who's fighting, who's angry, who's in power, who's out of power. It's constant noise designed to convince us that we're helpless spectators in our own country. But then a story like this shows up, a small, almost quiet act of service, and it reminds you that the country isn't built in Washington. It's built in school cafeterias, on playgrounds, in neighborhoods, in places where people show up even when no one told them they had to. And if you really think about it, the story of America isn't actually defined by the politicians we argue about. It's defined by ordinary people doing extraordinarily decent things. People with tools, people with time, people with compassion, people who see a problem and decide not to walk past it. Mason Smith didn't fix geopolitics. He didn't solve inflation. He didn't sign a bill or write an executive order. He just fixed a school. Sometimes fixing something small is exactly how you begin changing something big. So, I want to leave you with this. There are millions of Mason Smiths out there. They don't go viral. They don't trend. They don't ask for applause, but they're the reason people still believe their communities can be better than what they see on the news. They show us that even in the middle of chaos, compassion is happening quietly, reliably, and constantly. And if one dad with a drill can transform a school, imagine what a neighborhood could do. Imagine what a city could do. Imagine what we could do if we all decided to start where we are. And that's the America I still want to believe in. And stories like this are why. All right, listeners, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of another episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to listen. And I want you to reach out. I'm dying to hear from you, whether you use the social media platforms associated with the podcast. The links to all of those are on the Linktree page, and the address to the Linktree page is in the description of the episode. You can also reach out via email. The email address is neighborotleftpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear whether it's critiques or questions or concerns or comments, whatever. I'm asking you to please reach out and interact. We'll be back on Friday with another episode of Back Porch Files. So until then, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of week you'd wish for others.